The Jeffrey Epstein case stands as one of the most devastating examples of an institutional failure in modern American history. In my humble opinion, and a lot of other people. People are very mad, and they've been mad for a long time. It's just, for some reason, just now becoming a big deal. I wonder why. Despite evidence of over 1,000 victims, the case has effectively been closed with minimal accountability, mainly because the lead guy doesn't exist anymore. He's rotting. So there's a lot of people who care about this right now and a lot of people who don't. They're just shrugging it off. Oh, it's another psyop. It's a distraction to everybody, especially those people. I would ask, how could a convicted sex offender operate a trafficking network for decades while and after rubbing shoulders with some of the most powerful and influential people on the planet, and it all just gets swept under the rug? Today we're going to be trying to find out if this whole thing is calculated manipulation behind the scenes to dismantle the movement towards justice, or is it simply a baffling sequence of consistent, systematic failures at every single level of law enforcement and justice that our systems have to offer? Let us go back to the very beginning and see where the trail leads. And we'll start with an important disclaimer. I believe, as a non-biased person, that it is essential to mention something at the beginning of this video, and that is, I will mention various names. Many of them are individuals at the tippy top of their respective fields, including finance, entertainment, and believe it or not, government. We will cover many allegations and claims that have been made against said individuals, and unless charges are ever brought against any of these people, these are only allegations. All right, guys? Allegations. That's all they are. The only people who have ever faced charges in connection to what happened at Jeffrey Epstein's private island and his home in New York and his home in Florida are himself, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Jean-Luc Bernal. 3 people, 1,000 victims. Crazy. Surprisingly, Jeffrey Epstein came from a middle-class family in Brooklyn, New York. His mother, Pauline Stolovsky Epstein, went by Paula and was a part-time school aide. And his father, Seymour Epstein, worked as a groundskeeper for the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. Jeffrey was a smart kid, graduating from Lafayette High School 2 years early at 16 years old, but when it came to further education, he didn't engage with classes and dropped out of 2 separate institutions, Cooper Union and New York University, without ever receiving a degree. But somehow, eventually, he landed a teaching gig at Dalton School, which is a prep school on the Upper East Side where he taught math and science. During his employment there, it is noted he didn't observe dress code norms. He would walk the halls in fur coats with gold chains laid over his bare chest, exposed by his open and unbuttoned shirt. And even during his time at Dalton, former students noted his prying eyes and fixation with girls who were students at the school, even showing up to parties where students were drinking. And this is while he's teaching there. This was allegedly brought to the attention of the school administration, but Epstein was fired anyway, ultimately due to poor performance and disgusting hairy chest, rather than any documented behavioral issues. But during his 2-year stint at Dalton School, Jeffrey made a quite powerful connection, his first of many. The father of one of the students was Alan Greenberg, the CEO of Bear Stearns, which is a global investment banker thing. Epstein transitioned into Bear Stearns as an assistant and climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a trader who advised some of the company's biggest clients. And in early 1981, Jeffrey faced his first legal trouble following allegations of insider trading and an SEC investigation while at Bear Stearns. And these are the heydays of SEC investigations. It was the Wild West in investment banker groups. He was never convicted of insider trading, but the confidence of the executive committee was shaken, which led him to leave the company and eventually forming his own firm, the Intercontinental Assets Group, aka IAG. And Jeffrey ran the IAG out of his apartment. And this is where things start to heat up. One of his biggest clients at this time was Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder and CEO of L Brands, which was the parent company to brands like Victoria's Secret and Bath & Body Works. Huge names. Do you remember the 2024 song Victoria's Secret by Jax, which called out Victoria's Secret for being a brand that preyed on women's insecurities, and Victoria was a fictional character that a dude in Ohio made up?
Like it was just a fabricated version of this perfect girl that was made up by this like old man.
Leslie Wexner was the dude in Ohio. Mentioned in the bop. I don't know if that's how you danced it. I really don't know, dude. I'm so stupid. Jeffrey was Leslie's right-hand man with power of attorney over his fortune. Power of attorney, if you don't know, is basically giving someone a legal say to make decisions on your behalf. And Leslie would later reveal that while Epstein had control of his finances, he misappropriated more than $46 million in a single transfer, which Wexner claimed was just a portion of the misappropriated funds total. Leslie Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein's relationship was eventually severed in 2007, but the misappropriation was discovered after the two had their falling out. So, what was the reason for the two going their separate ways if not for stolen money? By stolen money, I mean over $47 million of misappropriated funds. Shortly before that, the serious allegations Epstein became notorious for started coming out. The first substantive investigation into Epstein's crimes began in March 2005 when a mother reported that her 14-year-old daughter had been having sex with a grown man in a mansion in Palm Beach. This was Epstein, and it was his Palm Beach mansion. Under the leadership of Police Chief Michael Reiter, a 13-month investigation identified many underage girls, high school students, all of whom Epstein had hired to give him massages going back to 2002. He'd even used the girls to recruit other girls for him, paying hundreds of dollars to victims for each sexual encounter, as well as recruitment of those who would become victims. The Palm Beach police had wanted to charge Epstein with multiple counts of unlawful sex with a minor, but it seemed, however, that there may have been a leak from inside the investigation. Detectives had obtained a search warrant, and when they arrived at Epstein's home, the place had been completely cleaned, and the computer containing home surveillance footage was gone, with wires hanging where it should have been. So very conveniently, he got away just the nick of time. And Police Chief Reiter would then experience frustration from the prosecutors who were supposed to spearhead the effort to put this individual behind bars. He even theorized the leak may have been within the state attorney's office, meaning there is people involved in this. Suddenly, witnesses weren't credible. They were uncooperative, and the defense knew small details that had only been shared with the state attorneys. So who were the attorneys in question? Barry Kreischer was the state attorney and the county's top prosecutor during that time, and Police Chief Reiter would even ask Kreischer to remove himself from the case following the office's change in attitude towards the investigation into Epstein. This change of attitude is very bizarre, by the way, if you're familiar with the law at all, prosecuting people and stuff. In charge of the case was U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, who you may have heard of before. He would later become the U.S. Labor Secretary under Trump's administration, which is convenient considering Trump's later influence on the Epstein files. Maybe it's convenient, I don't really know. I don't know a lot, to be honest. I do know that I have a piece of bread here with a screw in it, though. I've been playing with it all day. My screw bread. It's my screw bread. It keeps me calm. All right, guys, it's my screw bread. Things are a little turbulent right now. The FBI even got involved when Reiter and the lead detective reached out to them because they were unhappy with Kreischer's handling of the case, and with their help, even more victims were found. The prosecution was seen as a failure in the eyes of many, and what should have been a simple case of a grown man in his 40s abusing high school students and recruiting high school students to find other high school students to then victimize them, that should have been simple, and it became anything but that. State Attorney Barry Kreischer sent the case to a grand jury which would only indict him on a single count of soliciting prostitution. Minor charge compared to what he's alleged to have done. And this is what frustrated Reiter to the point of reaching out to the FBI. And on July 31st, 2007, Acosta would entertain a plea deal from Epstein's defense attorneys, allowing him to sidestep federal prosecution if he pled guilty to state charges and served 2 years in prison. And in June 2008, he pled guilty to state charges, not federal charges, of 1 count of soliciting prostitution and 1 count of soliciting prostitution from someone under the age of 18. Jeffrey's sentence was only 18 months, and he'd only serve 13 of the 18, getting out in July 2009. But wait, it gets better. He was placed on the sex offender registry. He had to do that stupid dance that they have to do and go knock on people's... Just kidding. He didn't have to do any of that. But after he got out in July of 2009, he did serve another year under house arrest. And get this, for a lot of the time he was in jail, he wasn't even in jail, guys. He had a work release that allowed him to leave jail during the day to work at his office for up to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, and then return to jail at night. I've never heard of anything like that. I know people who've gone to jail for bullshit, and they don't get to go on work release. Probably because they're not billionaires, and they don't molest children with other billionaires. What's even crazier is that Epstein was responsible for his own transportation to and from prison. His driver would pick him up in a limo to go to his office, where a sheriff's deputy would meet him there. Just in case you were wondering, he was required to wear an ankle monitor, so thankfully he's, they have his location or whatever. It's not like he's in jail to learn or in jail to stay in jail. He might as well have just been on house arrest for 3 years. And according to reporting from the Washington Post, it was like he had an unlocked cell, both figuratively and literally. So one question you might be asking, I can see you boiling with rage, how did Epstein qualify for a work release? It seems unthinkable given the severity of his crimes and what people suspect him of doing even beyond what he was charged with. In an interview, Chief Deputy Gauger says that to go over the requirements and criteria to qualify for a work release would take 15 minutes, but he simplified it and said that Epstein met every single one of those requirements.
So you said that he followed the qualifications to go on work release. What are those qualifications?
Well, they're numerous, and there's a whole list of those. If you want, I would have to go over those. It would take us about 15 minutes.
Sure.
But he met every one of those parameters.
Which, that, by the way, is just not true. On the Florida Senate government's website, there's a review of the inmate work release law from January 2004, so before Epstein ever came under investigation. On page 3, it outlines who is eligible to participate. The only 2 restrictions barring inmates from participation are inmates convicted of sex crimes and those convicted of escape. Epstein was convicted of sex crimes and then legally allowed to escape from jail, it seemed like, because he's just driving around doing whatever he wanted. He had to register as a sex offender, so how exactly did he get this amazing plea deal from all these extremely talented lawyers concerned with justice? Unsurprisingly, it's alleged that Epstein's sexual abuse didn't stop during his time in jail, and he continued to have visits from young women while on work release at his office in West Palm Beach, where women who were allegedly flown to him from as far as New York to continue the same conduct he was arrested for while he was still in jail. He was doing the exact same thing. 2 women alleged that at the age of 18, they'd been brought to Epstein and he was completely naked save his ankle monitor before he began making sexual contact with them. These are witnesses that testified. So how exactly did this go unnoticed by the deputies who were supervising him? They denied that it ever happened. They said, supervising him? He's supervised. He's awesome. This guy, this Epstein guy, he's really cool. The guys supervising him denied that it ever happened, but the Washington Post's earlier findings muddy the waters on that somewhat. Apparently, inmates on work release aren't typically even accompanied by deputies, given the number of work release inmates, with page 5 of the 2004 Florida Senate review indicating over 2,000 in the year 2003. It's a significant amount of manpower to supervise each inmate consistently for upwards of 12 hours a day, per day, 6 days a week, especially if they're doing more crimes like Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein reportedly paid $128,136 for deputies to accompany him, and the way it's described is insane. The Washington Post noted that in the deputy documentation reporting on the Epstein case regarding the work release program, he is often referred to as the client. Deputies even believed their job was to provide security for Epstein and were told as much whenever they sought verification. Those who accompanied him wore suits rather than, deputy uniforms, and rarely interfered while he was working, acting more like doormen, allowing welcomed guests, the welcomed guests. They would even take him to his home, where he would stay sometimes for 4 hours without ever going into the residence, which is very confusing. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would he do that? I don't know. So yeah, it seems like justice when you got a lot of money is a bit finicky, but don't tell that to Chief Deputy Gauger. He expressed sadness that people believed corruption was the reason Epstein had all these different privileges.
People don't know about the situation.
Well, I'm just saddened that some people think that it was corruption, that he was given all these privileges because of his wealth. It was not so. I mean, he was made to jump through extra hoops and meet additional requirements because of his wealth that others are not mandated to do during their work release.
With Epstein shelling out that kind of money on top of 92 deputies applying for the job of accompanying him with the promise of overtime pay between $42 and $64 an hour, deputies who were uncertain how far to push the work release do's and don'ts, it's all sort of confusing to me, to be honest, guys. Rules for thee, not for me. One deputy even reportedly wrote in the log, "It should be noted that he is very happy with the service we're providing him." Now, one might think that the deputies accompanying Epstein would be for the safety of the public, not for his security providing him services. You'd think that a man in jail might have one or two less privileges than the average person on the street, but I guess not. Also, when the media picked up on his work release and it gained traction years later when the women he's allegedly abused during this program came out, as well as all of the other allegations we'll eventually get to, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office discontinued the work release program. So if you didn't do anything wrong, then why would you shut down the work program? You know, it seems like a convenient way to just say, you know, sorry guys, I guess. We won't do that again. So, all that was happening under the watchful eye of sheriff's deputies during the period considered Epstein's incarceration. That was when he was locked up. After his release, he had a year of house arrest, and during that time, when he's on house arrest, traveled between Florida, New York, and the Virgin Islands to his residence on Little St. James, which has become colloquially known as Epstein's Island. These were day trips or sometimes weekend trips, but still, the trips were a luxury of travel at a frequency even most who aren't under house arrest can enjoy. Aren't under house arrest. House arrest, key phrase. Then, after Epstein's release from house arrest in 2010, he faced fewer issues, encountering only minor setbacks as he settled multiple civil lawsuits filed by victims. You know, classic that stuff. It's unbelievable that this guy was friends with people even after. He was talking to people even after, and rich people and hanging out with. It gets so much worse, dude. It gets so much worse. Reporting from the Palm Beach Post shares that some sought as much as $50 million, but he negotiated that down and ended up paying off at least 25 victims if they dropped their claims against him. So these are civil lawsuits, by the way, which, to be fair, you can just sue somebody for basically nothing. But if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And brother went to jail, I guess, kind of, for the same thing that a lot of these civil lawsuits were claiming. So, you know, say whatever you will. There are Epstein defenders, by the way. There's like a lot of people who actually defend him. Surprising amount. It seems like when you have enough money, you find yourself on the benefiting end of the two-tiered justice system where you can pay off victims who are struggling to survive so as long as they waive their right to pursue legal recourse against you. You know, it happens a lot. For example, I'm not going to bring that up. I'm going to get sued. It happens a lot, though, guys, even on YouTube. Epstein was a man who surrounded himself with the most influential, rich, and powerful people in the world, many of which we will go over in this video. Many people were associated with him before his conviction, which is important to note, some of whom faced similar accusations over the years and may have distanced themselves to reduce the potential for scrutiny that could be attributed to them as a result of all this falling out, or justice, as some of us call it. But also, like, not really, though. There's also a lot of powerful people who associated with Epstein even after everything came out about him and after he was a convicted sex offender and pedophile. Leon Black's relationship with Epstein represents the most striking example of post-conviction financial support. The founder of Apollo Global Management paid Epstein $158 million between 2012 and 2017 for tax and estate planning advice. This was an amount that the Senate Finance Committee would later investigate, as it was deemed inexplicably high and far exceeded the rates charged to other advisors. It makes even less sense when you consider that the work that Epstein did still needed to be vetted by other legal and accounting professionals since he had no qualifications. Very confusing. Meanwhile, I know like 4 entrepreneurs who don't even make any money and have been audited by the IRS. So, what was going on here? The answer would appear to be that this was a close friend jumping through hoops to justify keeping Jeffrey Epstein as wealthy as possible. Now, in the future, Leon Black is expected to step down as CEO of Apollo Global Management due to the potential case against Epstein and the, unfavorable optics. Kind of a bad guy, probably, to be honest. Speaking on his relationship with Epstein, a report from an outside firm hired to investigate Black and Epstein's relationship stated that Black had no recollection of ever seeing Epstein with an underage woman. He couldn't remember, guys, so maybe we should just leave him alone. Of course, contrary to that statement, Leon Black was later accused of raping a 16-year-old girl in Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan townhouse in 2002 when the woman, Cherry Pearson, sued Black, though that lawsuit was later dismissed. In 2011, just a year after his house arrest period ended, Epstein and Bill Gates, the co-founder of Microsoft, currently the 12th richest person in the world, formed an association and met together on many occasions. So, big round of applause. I love Windows, especially Windows 11. Some of the wealthiest men in the world surrounded Epstein, and they couldn't help but associate with him and the other wealthy elite in his orbit, even if it was, of course, completely contradictory to what they'd publicly advocated for. In the case of Bill Gates, the self-named Gates Foundation had funded and launched many programs to protect and improve the lives of all ages of youth. But not those who are being taken advantage of by a rich guy like Bill Gates. Not that he's taking advantage of them necessarily, but a rich guy like Bill Gates, Jeffrey Epstein. Anyways, Bill was meeting with a man who had been convicted of child sex crimes and was a registered sex offender. Just so you guys know that Bill Gates did actually do that 100% net with him. I'm not saying he did anything illegal, but he did decide to be his friend after. Now, of course, after everything would later come out and Jeffrey Epstein would die, Bill Gates would express regret for his association with Epstein and recognize his actions were a contradiction of his values and the values of the Gates Foundation. Thank you, Bill, for coming clean. Or should I say, thank you, Bridget Arnold, spokeswoman of Bill Gates, for making that statement on his behalf. Epstein was twisting and shaking dicks with any person or institution with money, and their executives were lining up for a grab and tug. JP Morgan maintained over 50 accounts worth hundreds of millions of dollars for Epstein until 2013, just in case you guys were wondering. And Deutsche Bank picked him up immediately after he severed ties with JP Morgan because he's got a lot of money. By the way, banks now will prevent people from using their platforms for having political beliefs or even having OnlyFans. So just in case you're wondering that, you can't use things like PayPal unless you have a high enough social credit. But I guess if you're a billionaire, it doesn't count. JP Morgan was accused of facilitating Epstein's abuse of his victims, with the bank eventually paying a $290 million settlement to the victims and a further $75 million to the U.S. Virgin Islands. Crazy. Banks were complicit. It's unbelievable, dude. How is it possible that there's so many evil people out there? Well, there's not that many of them. It's just that they are abhorrent and they're so evil. And it's all this stuff's happened. But it's like, how do you not know about this? How is this not like taught in schools? It's crazy! Old Deutsche Bank also paid a $75 million settlement after being accused from benefiting from and facilitating Epstein's trafficking ring, so they had to pay money. Now, to be very, very, very clear and legal, and I do respect the justice system and the legal system, I do believe that it's beautiful and it's awesome and certainly can be, misappropriated, etc., like Jeffrey Epstein misappropriating funds of his friends, but settling a lawsuit or anything, giving someone money to get them to shut up, doesn't leave the individual giving the money legally responsible or liable, and it isn't a legally recognized admission of guilt. But if you're using your brain for 5 seconds, that's pretty odd. I mean, it's strange, right? Like, it's really weird. The pieces, they're coming together. Jess Staley, the private banking chief for JP Morgan and later the CEO of Barclays, exchanged over 1,000 emails with Epstein between 2008 and 2012. Seems like old Jess only started liking Epstein after the crimes. That's a weird way to make friends. In some of these emails, Jess referred to Jeff as family, and described their friendship as profound, which I found lots of rich people like to describe menial things like friendships as profound. Staley also has had sex with a woman that he described as consensual, with her being on Epstein's staff, but later emails exchanged between Epstein and Staley look pretty bad. Staley emailed Epstein in 2010, the year that his house arrest finished, to say, "That was fun. Say hi to Snow White." Snow White, if you don't know, is the famous Disney princess who is 14 years old. Epstein later replied asking which character Staley wanted next, and Staley said Beauty and the Beast. Conveniently, Staley didn't remember sending any of those emails. Of course, I forgot it. Ha! My friend has a pedophile? Ah, crap. Dude. What? By the way, old Staley resigned after being probed for mischaracterizing his relationship with pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. So, you know, once again, not an admission of guilt, but Donald Trump is another billionaire and president of the United States for the second time, with a history involving Epstein that would seemingly indicate that they were close friends dating all the way back to the 1980s. In 2002, Trump told the New York Magazine, "I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy, he's lots of fun to be with. It's even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." That is a real quote from Donald Trump, no doubt about it. Jeffrey enjoys his social life. That's a quote from Donald Trump. Real, unadulterated, legitimate. If you go 15 years before 2002, you have the year 1987. And in 1992, the two partied together at the Trump-owned Mar-a-Lago estate. And in the background, you can see Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman who is currently in jail, and all the talk, all the rage in regard to Epstein. Ghislaine, by the way, if you didn't know, is the woman who lured girls to Epstein, and you can see her in this photo meandering and having a grand old time. Her and Trump and Epstein. With her, Trump and Epstein. Trump would also fly on Epstein's jets at least 7 times in the 90s, and multiple women accused Trump of sexual assault in connection with Epstein. Additionally, Mr. Trump had a calendar girl competition organized with 28 girls. The only other attendants, other than the 28 girls, was Jeffrey Epstein. The girlfriend of the party organizer, Jill Harth, accused Trump of assault the night of the party, and there was even a lawsuit in 1997 that was settled. And the allegation was that he forcibly kissed and fondled her, and back in 2005, there was recorded audio of Trump bragging about just kissing women and groping them. So, he said that he likes doing that. So, just in case you guys weren't aware.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even know. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the I can do anything.
One of Epstein's ex-girlfriends, who was a former model, claimed that in 1993, Epstein took her to Trump, where she was then groped. And Trump, of course, has fervently denied that any of this took place, even threatening to sue any accusers in 2016. Epstein was even questioned on video about his friendship with Trump during a time when he was settling with accusers after his release from house arrest in 2010. He was asked in the video if he'd ever socialized with Trump in the presence of minors, to which he simply exercises his rights to remain silent.
Have you ever socialized with Donald Trump in the presence of females under the age of 18?
Epstein pauses, shakes his head, then answers.
Though I'd like to answer that question, at least today, I'm going to have to assert my 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment rights, sir.
Or I guess his right to remain silent, and then his rights as a free sovereign citizen, or whatever the he said. My 14th Amendment right. Yay! Spill the beans, Epi. Go down with the ship. Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate played a significant role in future accusations involving more prominent figures in Epstein's orbit. For example, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, a member of the British royal family, was photographed with Trump and Epstein at Mar-a-Lago in February 2002, and still, the prince's relationship predates that photo. The length of the friendship between Prince Andrew and Epstein is a matter of debate. Andrew said that they met in 1999 and they were only friends due to mutual associations, spending little time together.
Well, I met through his girlfriend, in the UK.
But Andrew's private secretary, Alistair Watson, says differently. According to Watson, the two met in the early 1990s. Now let's suppose that Epstein and Andrew were only friends due to their association and having mutual friends. Why were Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell photographed vacationing at a log cabin in Balmoral where the royal family takes trips? The same log cabin has been photographed with the Queen and Prince Philip in that exact location. Plus, Epstein and Maxwell attended Prince Andrew's 40th birthday party in June of 2000, as well as accompanied him to Royal Ascot, which is a racing event held annually and attended by the King and Queen. When asked about this in an interview later, Andrew said that he'd invited Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein was the +1. Currently serving 20 years for trafficking minors, and the serial rapist pedophile who killed himself in prison was just the +1. Thank you, Prince Andrew. Now, I mentioned the interview that Andrew gave to BBC Newsnight because it's largely considered a massive train wreck that he uses to try and distance himself and downplay their relationship when all evidence seems to point to the contrary. Actual evidence, photos, events, and of course it's a theme that continues when it's brought up that the two maintained contact immediately following Epstein's stint in house arrest following his imprisonment. They were just chilling. Only 4 months after Epstein was released from house arrest, Epstein threw a party to celebrate his freedom, with Prince Andrew being invited as the guest of honor. Prince Andrew stayed with him for several days at his New York City home. So, you know, just casual acquaintances, I guess. It was an event described by Katie Couric as a party and was like eyes wide shut with a twist. That is a quote that she said. Eyes Wide Shut, if you don't know, by the way, is the Kubrick film with Tom Cruise where there's a masked ritual and a secret sex party and it's horrible and evil and I don't know. There's a lot of symbolism and it's really weird. Kubrick died before it was released. It's really evil and honestly, I feel like it's just real life for a lot of rich people, to be honest. It's kind of what I'm starting to believe nowadays. By the way, I almost forgot this. This is a photo of Epstein and Prince Andrew strolling in the park, I guess, Central Park. So pretty cool. Andrew, of course, had explanations for this post-release meeting in his interview. It wasn't a party, it was a dinner. He wasn't there to celebrate, he was there to break off the relationship in an honorable way. You know, because he's the leader of the free world. He's the prince. He's gonna take the crown. He's gonna have the fiefdom. I pledge my fealty to Prince Andrew. Oh, yes, that is true. Which I doubt it. But I don't know much. I still don't understand the desire to do anything honorable for a convicted pedophile, or why you'd stayed with him for days if you mean to just crash on his couch for a few days. Oi, mate, just letting you know we gotta break off our old relationship. And then he's like, stay for a couple days. All right, sounds good, mate. Andrew's questioned further about the presence of young women at the event he supposedly attended to break off his friendship, saying that he never saw them. He compared the house to a railroad station with people constantly coming and going, but he had nothing to do with any of it, of course, guys. I don't believe a word this guy says, to be honest. Is that so? Prince Andrew, nothing to do with any of it? We'll see how long that lasts. So somehow and in some way, Epstein was surrounding himself with world leaders, former, current, and future. These are individuals who have faced allegations of impropriety, sexual assault, sexual harassment. Former President Bill Clinton is the man famous for not having sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky.
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
When he absolutely did have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky and admitted to it just over half a year later.
Indeed, I did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky that was not appropriate. In fact, it was wrong.
Bill Clinton, lying piece of shit. Just like most other people who are friends with Jeffrey Epstein. Wouldn't you know it? Bill Clinton, another friend of Jeffrey Epstein, a powerful man in the orbit of Epstein. In 1993, Jeffy and Jizzy attended an event for donors of the White House Historical Association where they were photographed with Bill Clinton, the president of the world at that time. In total, Epstein visited Clinton at the White House 17 times, according to visitors' logs. And Clinton flew on Epstein's jet multiple times in 2002 and 2003, which he even admitted to in his memoir, Citizen. Clinton and Epstein met a couple times at Epstein's properties, including his office and New York mansion. He obviously denies ever visiting the pedophile island, even though Epstein and Prince Andrew's accuser, Virginia Giuffre, has recalled meeting him at the island. Clinton was never photographed with Giuffre, but he was photographed with another Epstein accuser, Shante Davies. Shante, one of Epstein's masseuses, had given Clinton a massage at a Portuguese airport while Epstein's plane was refueling during a trip to Africa. Virginia Giuffre is going to be a name that comes up throughout the rest of this video because she is such a key figure in the push for Epstein and his associates to face consequences for their actions. Her experience and advocacy play a role in almost every facet of the unraveling of Epstein's empire. Important to note, Bill has also faced several accusations from 1998 and onward from women who accused him of not just cheating on his wife, but also of abuse of power, harassment, assault, and rape. Once again, very clear, these were allegations that never went to court, and Clinton has never been charged with a crime or admitted guilt or a liability, but a settlement of $850,000 was made to one woman who accused him of getting naked and propositioning her for sex. Just in case you guys were wondering about that.
I may need to be going or something, and next thing you know, he sat down, pulled down his pants, his whole everything, and he was exposed, and I said, I'm not that kind of girl.
Same with Trump. He's never been charged either. So, but just to be clear, Jeffrey Epstein is a serial rapist pedophile who went to jail for 13 months, and was on house arrest and still got to go to his pedophile island during all that and had deputies. So I'm starting to think that these things don't matter too much, but I don't really know. Circling back briefly to the trip to Africa, this is a trip that has been discussed by another influential individual who was also present on this flight, a man by the name of Kevin Spacy, former Hollywood golden boy whose career was marred by allegations that surfaced during the Me Too movement in 2017. Kevin was on this flight to Africa alongside Epstein and former US President Bill Clinton. Kevin has been accused of sexual harassment and assault by more than 30 men over the years, including Guy Pearce and Anthony Rapp, who was only 14 at the time he alleged Spacy molested him. However, that case was resolved with a jury finding Spacy did not molest Rapp.
A New York federal court jury siding with Spacy, finding that he did not sexually abuse actor Anthony Rapp back in the 1980s.
So Clinton, Spacy, and Epstein are on a plane, a trio that sounds like it should be the start of the worst joke ever told. Spacy appeared on Piers Morgan discussing the presence of young girls on the flight.
I didn't want to be around this guy because I felt he put the president at risk on that trip to South Africa because there were these young girls. And we were like, who is this guy?
But he denied ever visiting Epstein's island.
I never went to Jeffrey Epstein's island. I did not know him, and I never saw him or her.
It all takes shape, guys, forming what looks like an interconnected web. I could see Charlie Day rambling about it in Always Sunny, or maybe Frank writing a song about it. Because Kevin Spacy also ties into Prince Andrew's involvement with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Kevin Spacy was photographed at Buckingham Palace sitting on a throne alongside Ghislaine Maxwell approximately in 2002. On Piers Morgan, Spacy talked about this picture. He says that while he and Clinton were on the trip to Africa, Clinton told him that afterwards he was going to Buckingham Palace to see Prince Andrew and invited Spacy to tag along, which Spacy obviously did. I mean, this guy's the king of the world, going to talk to the Emperor of the West, or whatever the
After that morning at Buckingham Palace, he didn't even come to Buckingham Palace. She was only
is it
there.
true that Prince Andrew sought your assistance and wanted you to testify that Ghislaine Maxwell was your guest, not his, during that Buckingham Palace tour?
I heard a report about that, but at no time did anyone ever contact me on his behalf. And as I say, I'm not friends with him. I never saw him after that day.
He says he then met Prince Andrew for the first and only time. Spacy claims he had no relationship with Maxwell or Epstein, but when everything started coming out, Prince Andrew asked that Spacy come forward to say that Maxwell was there as Spacy's guest, not his. So, conflicting. Who are you gonna believe? The British guy or the weird freak guy? I don't even know. Kevin Spacy, he's a good actor. But articles have also revealed that despite Spacy's claim, the palace trip wasn't the only time he and the prince had met, and the two met at a benefit for Old Vic Theater in 2003 as well. So none of these people can keep their stories straight. So Epstein's got all kinds of friends, and Epstein had one friend potentially just as close to him as Ghislaine Maxwell was, and that was Jean-Luc Brunel, the boss of a French modeling agency. Jean-Luc, with his position at the top of a model agency where beautiful women and girls would seek careers of glamour, he was perfectly positioned to abuse his position of power for sexual gain for himself and Epstein. And Jean-Luc Brunel could be compared essentially to the modeling world's version of what Harvey Weinstein was to the film industry. Epstein had even helped fund the launch of Jean-Luc's MC2 model management agency with up to $1 million in funding. MC2 was located in Miami, so close enough for Epstein to prey upon aspiring models while visiting his Palm Beach property. So Epstein begins his career, meets a bunch of famous people, goes to jail, gets out of jail, still hanging out with a bunch of cool people, and unfortunately, due to actions that we will soon discuss, coverage of Epstein and his relationships around the time of his most recent arrest were almost non-existent. There was just no coverage. Nobody knew. It was so strange. On the surface, it looked as though most of the world had opted to put Epstein's crimes in the rear view, or they just never knew what had happened. People, organizations, and institutions would rather not look into the criminal history of this freak, or maybe they would just simply ignore it due to the potential opportunities that being in his orbit could present. It seems to be what people do. Harvard University, for example, even had a web page listing Jeffrey Epstein as a friend. The page references the formation of the Jeffrey Epstein 6 Foundation in 2000 and donations to support AI through the OpenCog Foundation in 2014 and Micropsy the year before. Conveniently, they leave out all the issues that Jeffrey Epstein faced in the 2000s. Obviously now the page doesn't exist, but the internet Wayback Machine remembers it all. And the Epstein case may have remained buried if not for Miami Herald investigative reporter Julie K. Brown. Her 2-year investigation was published as a Perversion of Justice series beginning on November 28, 2018. Brown identified nearly 80 victims, interviewed 60, and persuaded multiple people to speak on record. It was a remarkable achievement for Brown and an astounding show of courage from the women given the trauma and intimidation that they had all endured. Victims didn't want to be silenced again and did interviews to keep momentum going in hopes of Jeffrey Epstein finally facing justice for what he had done and the people around him, what they had done. One such victim was Virginia Giuffre, potentially the most vocal of Epstein's accusers, who claimed to have been recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell when she was 15 years old and was made to have sexual encounters with businessmen, politicians, and royalty. She specifically called out Prince Andrew, saying that Epstein paid her $10,000 to have sex with the prince. At the same time, she was underage and alleged that the prince was a participant in an orgy with multiple underage girls on Epstein's island. Andrew, of course, denied any involvement in the interview with BBC, going into much conflicting detail. Despite being seen in photographs with Virginia and Ghislaine, he insists that he has no idea who she is and doesn't remember meeting her ever. Never remember. He also went as far to say that the night this allegedly happened, he remembers specifically being at home with his kids.
Do you remember dancing at Tramp?
No. That couldn't have happened because the date that is being suggested, I was at home with the children.
Thing is, I don't know how he recollects one specific night from 18 years ago when, from all of my searching, I couldn't find a specific date mentioned anywhere by Virginia, only a mention of it being in March of 2001. He knows the exact date, though. Of course he knows the exact date. And he knows that he was a family man at home with his kids. And shit, I believe him. This guy's full of, valuable information. How convenient that he remembers having an alibi for such a specific night that no one else has ever mentioned publicly. Further, Virginia filed a civil suit against Andrew in the United States in 2021, and Andrew's attempts to have the case dismissed in 2022 were denied. Andrew was stripped of his military affiliation and royal patronages by the Queen. He settled the lawsuit with Virginia outside of court with an undisclosed financial amount that admitted no wrongdoing or liability. Classic. The Miami Herald's reporting laid out what many people feel to be the truth now, it seems. The criminal justice system essentially worked with Epstein to ensure that he paid as little a price as possible for his crimes. Prosecutors allegedly violated the Victims' Rights Act and were even working together with the defense attorneys against the victims. This is all context for what we were saying earlier. Emails showed that Acosta had made promises to the defense lawyers to keep the deal confidential, ensuring that no details of the bargain would reach victims or the media. They followed the lead of Epstein's legal team and even reportedly suggested that the charges be filed in Miami rather than Palm Beach, where the victims lived. The Crime Victims' Rights Act outlines that victims of any crime that is to be proceeded in court, they have the right to be notified of those proceedings and the right to appear for the proceedings. Of course, they're a victim in the crime, but thanks to the effort from the prosecution and defense, seemingly working in tandem, at Epstein's sentencing in June 2008, of the victims, not a single one appeared. Spencer Kuven, a lawyer who represented one of the victims, said that the 14-year-old girl he represented was taken advantage of twice, once by Epstein and again by the criminal justice system that labeled her a prostitute. There were two primary targets of this bombshell journalism: Jeffrey Epstein, obviously, for what he had done, and Alexander Acosta, the former U.S. attorney who had arranged the deal that allowed Epstein to not only serve just 13 months, but spend the majority of that with an unlocked cell and outside prison walls. Pee-pee thing on his little ankle. Oh, he gets to go to work. And he gets security. At this point, when all this came out, Acosta was serving as President Donald Trump's labor secretary, which is a role he was nominated for personally by Trump in February of 2017.
The nominee for Secretary of the Department of Labor will be Mr. Alex Acosta.
For many, it was the first time they had heard the name Jeffrey Epstein or what he had done and the sweetheart deal that he received, and all that was just a slap on the wrist for what should have been, at the very least, prison for a long time. Maybe life. The journalism on display was so well done with solid information that the case was revisited. This time, it was revisited by federal prosecutors who determined that they weren't bound by the non-prosecution deal that Acosta had arranged, aka giant piece of shit. William Sweeney, the assistant director in charge of the FBI's New York field office, said, "We work with facts. When the facts presented themselves, as Miss Berman hinted at through investigative journalist work, we moved on it." By moved on it, Sweeney was referring to the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein on July 6th, 2019. The same month, Labor Secretary Alex Acosta, serving under Donald Trump, would resign, by the way. Alongside Epstein's arrest, his mansion was raided and evidence was seized by federal agents armed with a search warrant. There's tons of famous photos of them coming out of the house with bags full of seized items, including a vast trove of lewd photographs of young women and girls. Horrible, CSAM, disgusting stuff. And on July 8th, the U.S. Attorney's Office would post a press release on justice.gov announcing that Jeffrey Epstein was being charged with sex trafficking minors as well as a conspiracy to commit sex trafficking of minors between 2002 and 2005. It also makes a claim that has led to recent discussions surrounding Epstein, people who are unhappy with the result. U.S. Attorney Jeffrey S. Berman, FBI Assistant Director William F. Sweeney Jr., and NYPD Commissioner James P. O'Neill urged all victims to come forward. Regardless of their age at the time of the incident or their current age, they deserved their day in court. But unfortunately, their day in court would be robbed of them, as on August 10th, barely a month after Epstein was arrested, he was found hanging dead in his cell. Was ruled a suicide.
Peter, what we know now is that at 6:39 this morning, the fire department and EMS here in New York City got a phone call from MCC, which is a federal detention facility here in Manhattan in New York City, where Jeffrey Epstein was being held awaiting trial. They took him to New York's downtown hospital. He was in cardiac arrest, and he was pronounced there.
This event was very conspiratorial. There were so many theories of conspiracy as well as theories of just negligence. Why was he not on suicide watch? How did he have something that he could have used to end his own life? Or the idea that maybe it was a murder staged as a suicide to silence him. Or maybe the prison guards killed him. I don't know. Did he do it? Did someone else do it? That's what everybody wanted to know. And that's what everyone wants to know even today. And some on both sides may point to an incident that occurred 2 weeks after his arrest as evidence for their side. On July 24th, 2019, Epstein was found injured in his cell. He was found semi-conscious on the floor of his cell in the fetal position with marks around his neck as well as with a piece of bedsheet. So maybe he tried to kill himself then. Maybe he'd staged an attack potentially to try and facilitate a transfer, or maybe make an argument that he wasn't safe and that he should be allowed bail, which he'd been denied a week earlier, or maybe he'd legitimately been attacked. We have no idea. Whichever of those things is true, it doesn't matter. The fact is that 17 days later, he was found dead of an apparent ruled suicide, which just proves that there was some kind of gross negligence at the very least, because he was hurt and then he hurt himself even worse. It happens once, confiscate everything. Should be on watch, right? If it was an actual attack, how could he not be watched closely? If he's in danger, there's another person trying to hurt him in his cell. It's so dumb. Other details leading up to Epstein's death also raise concerns and fuel further conspiracy theories. The morning of August 9th, the day before he was found dead, Epstein's cellmate was transferred out with no replacement being assigned. Then on August 9th, the officers responsible for conducting the required counts falsified count slips for the 4 p.m., 10 p.m., midnight, 3 a.m., or 5 a.m. counts, as internal video footage showed that these counts hadn't actually occurred. 2 guards, Tava Noel and Michael Thomas, were indicted and faced charges of federal conspiracy and filing false records, to which they pled not guilty. They were accused of sleeping and browsing the internet for things like furniture sales, 9gag, Reddit, motorcycles, and sports news when they should have been doing their rounds, in the prison they worked in. U.S. District Court Judge Annalisa Torres later dismissed the charges, and they were required only to complete 100 hours of community service and cooperate with a DOJ review. So, justice again, guys. Tava Noel was even named in a handwritten note found in Epstein's cell, which complained about the jail's conditions. Noel had also filed out over 75 separate falsified entries claiming to have conducted her 30-minute rounds in the special housing unit. Maybe if those counts had been performed as they were supposed to be performed, we'd be living in a world where Epstein's victims could have had the opportunity to face him in court and see justice actually served. But unfortunately, those 2 idiots robbed us of that. Side note, interesting but unconnected to the Epstein story, one of these guards, Tava Noel, became a medical office assistant and was sued for assault by a coworker her first week working there. Tava punched her coworker, Maida Roman, for being interrupted. Tava also later pulled her ear and yelled at her in front of coworkers, so she was a freak. I don't know. And then, in what feels like an even further failure of justice with everything surrounding the Epstein fiasco, when Maida brought the situation to HR, she was fired a week later while Tava kept her job. Anyways, back to Epstein. An autopsy was conducted of Epstein's body with multiple injuries being discovered. He had contusions or bruises on both wrists, an abrasion on his forearm, deep muscle hemorrhaging on his left shoulder, and an injury to the back of the neck, cut on his lip, and an injection site on his arm, burst capillaries in his face, mouth, and eyes, which are generally associated with strangulation. Then fractures on the left and right thyroid cartilage and a fracture of the left hyoid bone. So the guy had the shit beat out of him, it seems like. Some of these injuries may have been the result of attempts to resuscitate Epstein at the hospital. It's possible, but still, many of those in his neck raised concerns with several individuals over whether or not it was actually a suicide. You'd think that with a suicide by hanging, injuries in the neck would be expected, but according to forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bodden, fractures like that don't simply happen in suicidal hangings, and they were flagged by him and others as being suspicious.
There were 3 fractures of the neck bones.
Dr. Bodden's key reasons for being suspicious about the death of Jeffrey Epstein is the broken hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage.
Dr. Bodden wasn't the one who conducted the autopsy, to be clear, nor is he one of the New York City medical examiners involved in evaluating the autopsy findings. It's essential to distinguish how he came to be involved, though. Mark Epstein, Jeffrey's brother, hired him to look into Epstein's death, and he was present during the autopsy, but he did not participate in it. Dr. Kristen Roman was the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy and didn't initially classify it as a suicide or homicide, but left it as pending. And Dr. Barbara Sampson, the chief medical examiner for New York City, was the one who ruled it a suicide. Dr. Bodden was one of the several pathologists whom 60 Minutes asked about the autopsy, and many were asked to comment on Bodden's findings as well, because there's, so much question. The internet was ablaze with the conspiracy, so people really wanted to know, and they were really digging deep. Some agreed that the burst capillaries were more common in homicide strangulation than suicidal hangings, but it's not impossible still. And several disagreed with the significance of the fractures, while one agreed that they had raised additional questions. It's very interesting. I'm just glad he's dead, but also sad because there's no justice. That's the easy way out. He took his 40th Amendment, his 16th, 19th, and 14th. I'm playing my 9th Amendment right. I just want to be quiet. 2 days after Epstein's death, FBI agents were seen raiding Little St. James, Epstein's private island, to recover further evidence. The DOJ would review Acosta's involvement in the original case, and while the review found that several terms in the original case's final agreement were unusual and problematic and left victims uninformed about the important proceeding that resolved the federal investigation, no evidence was found that the decision Acosta made was based on corruption and was simply an example of poor judgment. So, another win, guys. A federal court judge had previously found that victims' rights laws were violated by the Justice Department when it failed to notify the victims of the non-prosecution deal. A federal appeals court later overturned that ruling, though. On August 27, 2019, a hearing was held where Judge Richard Berman allowed victims to speak despite Epstein's recent death. Some women were public and used their names when making their statements to the court, but many chose to remain anonymous, with some even having their lawyers read their written statements. On screen are some of the words that these women shared about their suffering at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein. You guys can pause and read some of these. It's insane. It's extremely, it's up. Like, there's nothing I can say to really make it worse, as you can read it. Shantae Davies, the woman photographed massaging Bill Clinton in the airport, said, "I began my massage trying not to let him smell my fear and obvious discomfort, but before I knew what was happening, he grabbed onto my wrist and tugged me towards the bed. I tried to pull away, but he was unbuttoning my shorts and pulling my body onto his already naked body faster than I could think. I was searching for words, but all I could say was, 'No, please stop,' but that just seemed to excite him more." Ghislaine Maxwell, still free at the time of this hearing and after Jeffrey Epstein's death, was mentioned by victims when talking about the trauma that they suffered at the hands of Epstein. Annie Farmer, speaking on behalf of her sister Maria Farmer, the sisters who first came forward in the 1990s, she said, "Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell not only assaulted her, but as we're hearing from so many of these brave women here today, they stole her dreams and her livelihood." The victims, many of whom had prepared for years to face their abuser in court, had that opportunity stolen by what looked like an exhaustingly consistent pattern of institutional negligence from the very beginning to the very end. It just never ends. Every single time when there's an easy way or a corner to cut in the Jeffrey Epstein story, that is exactly what has happened. And I'm hoping that something stops. So Jeffrey Epstein's dead, and a lot of the victims have a day in court. What about Ghislaine Maxwell and Jean-Luc Brunel? Well, despite Epstein's death in August of 2019, Ghislaine would have almost an entire year of freedom before law enforcement would catch up to her as well. In the meantime, the mantra "Epstein didn't kill himself" was being echoed around the nation by us citizens, members of the service and members of the government alike. There's even this Fox News clip of an ex-Navy SEAL talking about canines, just randomly saying it.
If you see the coverage and you decide, I want one of these dogs, either buy a finished trained, fully trained and finished dog from a professional, or just don't get one at all. And Epstein didn't kill himself.
All right. Okay, thank you for that commentary. All right.
In New Hampshire, during the primaries, a man tried to list himself on the ballot as Epstein didn't kill himself. Congressman Paul Gosar of Arizona used the first letter of 23 tweets to spell out the phrase. Clovis Brewery of California painted the phrase on the bottom of a batch of beers. Some of it was the growth of a meme online, but among those shouting it were those who believed justice had been circumvented and accountability was being dismantled, and the whole institution and the powers that be are lying about it. Besides Jeffrey Epstein, there have only been 2 other notable arrests in connection with this 1,000 people crime, this trafficking ring that's just run by apparently 3 people. Jeffrey, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Jean-Luc Brunel. This is the most enraging fact, that just nobody's liable. What? Are you kidding me? The 3 of them are the only 3 who did it? Really? What about all the other people that are probably involved? Ghislaine Maxwell was tracked through sophisticated cell phone surveillance to a New Hampshire hideout. She was ultimately sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, while Jean-Luc Brunel evaded justice through suicide in a French jail after 16 months on the run. The prosecutions revealed a decades-long criminal partnership that trafficked hundreds of girls across international borders, with Maxwell's U.S. federal case resulting in conviction on 5 counts, including sex trafficking of a minor. In contrast, Brunel's French prosecution ended abruptly with his death before trial. Virginia Giuffre, the woman who accused Epstein of forcing minors to have sex with his friends, and specifically the allegation of Prince Andrew in that participation, also named Brunel. She alleged that Brunel would bring girls as young as 12 to the US for Epstein and his friends. I kind of glazed over how Ghislaine was captured. It's pretty cool though. FBI agents used an MC catcher device, commonly known as a stingray, to pinpoint Ghislaine Maxwell's exact location. The sophisticated surveillance operation tracked a phone registered under the alias G-Max that she used to communicate with her husband Scott Borgerson and sister Isabel. When she was caught, she tried to evade authorities and failed. She also had tried to shield her phone signal from escaping by wrapping it in tin foil. She'd been hiding out on a secluded piece of land near a small farming town. It was a 156-acre property with a multi-million-dollar home on it. It was purchased with the intent of hiding out, clearly, with the most recent purchase being traced to December in 2019 and an all-cash buy through an anonymous LLC. Clearly someone who has nothing to hide. During her apprehension with the FBI agents storming through town, locals believed a marijuana growing operation was being shut down, which is pretty funny. Ghislaine's crimes, the sexual trafficking, exploitation, and abuse of minors, went all the way back to 1994 and went on for at least a decade, according to the indictment against her, with victims as young as 14 years old. And Maxwell's criminal enterprise with Epstein evolved through two distinct phases. During the earlier phase, from 1994 to 2001, she targeted vulnerable girls one at a time, typically from single mother households and facing financial difficulties. The later phase, from 2001 to 2004, saw the creation of a pyramid scheme where victims were coerced into recruiting additional girls. During the first phase, while Maxwell herself was grooming victims, she preyed on girls by acting first like a friend or even like an older sister, if you will, and taking them to movies, going on shopping trips, and making them feel more comfortable at Epstein's properties and in his presence before the pressure to commit sexual acts would begin. Maxwell didn't just bring victims to Epstein, but participated in their assault as well. Victims would testify that she would be present in the room during the assault or take part in it. The victims would be encouraged to find other girls to satisfy Epstein, and one woman who testified against Ghislaine, going by the name Kate, outlined how Maxwell would ask if she knew any other girls that could give Epstein oral sex and how he needed to have sex 3 times a day. Maxwell, of course, pled not guilty and claimed that 15th Amendment, 14. She didn't claim any amendments as far as I know. She pled not guilty to the 6 federal charges that she faced, but she was still found guilty by a New York State jury in late December 2021 of 5 of the 6 counts, with the only exception being the charge of enticing a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. Nearly 6 months later, Judge Allison Nathan sentenced her to 20 years in federal prison with a $750,000 fine. And it seems like she's actually in prison, which is good. Prosecutors wanted her to serve up to 55 years due to her denying responsibility and the sheer number of victims, but it was the U.S. Probation Department that recommended the 20-year sentence. She didn't quite get the sweetheart deal that Epstein got back in the 2000s, but she still got short of what she deserves. Anything short of the death penalty is, getting it pretty good in my opinion for this type of nonsense. Ghislaine's also been placed in a prison that offers inmates classes and activities, from artistic ones like painting, ceramics, and leatherworking, team sports, basketball, volleyball, softball, yoga, Pilates. Nonsense. I don't know, dude. Just put them in a damn hole. Just put people in a hole. Why are they allowed to do this type of stuff? Why is the whole hotel rehab shit? Why is that a thing for people like this? Give that to people who are on drugs and stuff, who are just making mistakes. These aren't mistakes. You're evil. Go in a hole. Let's dig a hole for them or something. I don't know, dude. Like the hotel thing makes sense for maybe a DUI even on the far end. Learn from your mistakes. But if you've got victims, like actual victims, no. Hole. I don't care if you're a bitch. Hole. But instead she has talent shows, seems like, probably. Jean-Luc Brunel's imprisonment was a lot shorter lived and ended similarly to the Epstein ending. Jean-Luc Brunel built his career discovering models like Christy Turlington and Sharon Stone before becoming Epstein's primary supplier of young girls through his modeling agencies. Following the 2019 arrest of Epstein, Brunel went into hiding for 16 months, and he was wanted as a part of an investigation of alleged rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and trafficking of underage girls for sexual exploitation. On December 16, 16th, he was finally apprehended attempting to board a one-way flight to Dakar, Senegal. The French national was arrested at Charles de Gaulle Airport. I suppose he was going to Senegal because it's a country that appears to be a non-extradition country, which means it won't cooperate with law enforcement of another country or surrender criminals to countries where they may be wanted. I don't know why that's a thing. What is perhaps the most insane about Jean-Luc's history of abuse is that the coverage of it dates back to 1988, when CBS 60 Minutes aired an investigation revealing American models in Paris were being drugged and abused. And victims interviewed in the 60 Minutes episode described the environment as a meat market, where you are there for someone to try to take you home.
He is acting as a matchmaker. He's got the agency, he's got the girls. His friends say, oh, Jean-Luc, I'd like to meet some girls, or we're having a party tonight. Can you bring some girls? And what happens if you say no? You don't work.
And despite the exposure then, and even over a decade later in 1999, in an investigation of the fashion industry on the show McIntyre Undercover on BBC, Jean-Luc was able to continue operating with impunity. What? Virginia Giuffre provided a testimony to French authorities alleging Brunel raped her in the early 2000s at Epstein's private island, and Brunel has been photographed with Maxwell at Epstein's island, and a motion submitted by the lawyer of two victims described how Brunel farmed out girls to wealthy clients, especially Epstein. Similarly to Epstein, and over 2 years after Epstein, Jean-Luc Brunel was found dead in his prison cell hanging from bed sheets, despite being held in the vulnerable people area, which is a space for people seen to be at risk, facing violence as well, self-inflicted or otherwise. Brunel having attempted suicide several times beforehand, he was never formally added to the suicide watch list. It's so weird that they just, I guess it's, I don't know. No. Justice. They gotta face justice. The main difference between Brunel and Epstein is that after his death, it was confirmed that the guards had actually completed their required nightly checks. They do 5 per night. Even though CCTV footage didn't cover Brunel's cell, CCTV did show the guards doing their rounds, unlike the guards with Epstein. Brunel's death effectively ended the French prosecution, denying his victims as well the opportunity to face him at trial or receive official recognition of their victim status. It also came only days after Prince Andrew had settled his lawsuit with Virginia Giuffre. His defense claimed his suicide was driven not by guilt, but by a sense of injustice and judicial media lynching, maintaining his innocence to the very end. Giuffre, on the other hand, claimed that Epstein had bragged about sleeping with over 1,000 of Brunel's girls. So of the 3 people who had been arrested and faced charge relating to sex trafficking, abuse, and rape of minors, 2 had died similarly before they could ever be formally charged and sentenced, and 1 is seeing a prolonged stint behind bars with the occasional talent show thrown in. Plus the similarities between Jean-Luc and Epstein with the way that they died. Conspiracies are absolutely ripe. Ripe? I don't know. Since 2019, the case has evolved from a criminal prosecution into a symbol of institutional failure. Despite promises of transparency, over 11,500 FBI documents remain sealed. Multiple rounds of Epstein file releases have revealed a lot, though not enough in the eyes of many, and the way that the story continues to change leaves many skeptical about the true intentions of those who had previously championed accountability. And the timeline of document releases exposes how transparency promises consistently evaporate once politicians gain power. Court-ordered releases have provided the most substantial disclosures, not government action. In 2015, Epstein's Little Black Book, which contained contact information for those Epstein associated with, was released publicly for the first time. The release wasn't the result of any promise from an administration to be transparent with the public, but the result of Virginia Giuffre filing a defamation lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell after Maxwell called her a liar for claiming to be a victim. Gawker had published the book, making it publicly available. This was the first time we had access to the names of people who had flown aboard Epstein's private jets. It revealed some of the names we've already discussed flying aboard, that is Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, Les Wexner. It also contained many other names within the 92 pages. Woody Allen, the Hollywood director controversial for his marriage to a woman who was at one point his ex-wife's adopted daughter. Also Bill Cosby, a sexual assaulter, an old man. Adnan Khashoggi, a Saudi arms dealer, and many, many, many many more. This little black book wasn't exactly the proverbial nail in the coffin, as many people, investigations, and conspiracy theorists wanted. It just showed people who Jeffrey Epstein had contact with. The names who appeared in the pages were certainly seen as suspicious to many, but legally it proved nothing. Then during the US versus Maxwell case, Epstein's flight logs were released, revealing a wealth of information about who was flying on his planes, not just who he had in his Rolodex. It was a lot of information that became available, dates spanning from April 1991 to January 2006, with plane make and model, aircraft identification numbers, takeoffs and destination locations, and most importantly, passenger manifests. The passenger manifests are the subject of scrutiny because they are the ones who, on the innocent end of the spectrum, may have possibly only seen young girls or women in the company of Epstein, and on the guiltier end may have been complicit in their suffering. A lot of the time, those who rode on Epstein's planes are named. As an example, on May 15th, 1994, Donald Trump was named on a flight joining Epstein on a trip from Palm Beach, Florida, PBI, to Washington, D.C. And beginning on November 4th, 2003, Bill Clinton was named in a series of flights through November 11th, 2003, just spending a couple weeks with his bro. Some of the time, obviously, you could just not write people's names down. For example, if you're traveling to a pedophile island, it makes sense to not have proof that Bill Clinton, former president of the United States, or Donald Trump, former president of the United States, is going to your island to go commit crimes. Makes sense to not write that down. And there are times in which there are flights with as few as 2, 3, or even 4 passengers, which that's not very many people to go on a plane. So it seems like maybe they're just leaving names off. I'm not exactly sure. In January of 2024, we saw some of the first significant releases of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, all of these released to the public. The release, once again, was the result of Virginia Giuffre in her lawsuit. 943 pages of court documents, deposition transcripts, and legal correspondence are accessible at this time for the first time thanks to her. It is crucial to the increasing push for transparency and to find out what was recovered in the searches of Epstein's multiple properties from the time of his arrest to the time of his death. What was recovered, who was involved, what the f is going on. There is one particular email of note from Epstein to Maxwell that was released on January 12th, 2015, where Epstein told Maxwell to reward any friends and family of Giuffre who came forward to prove her false. This email also contains a reference that appears to insinuate Stephen Hawking's participation in an underage orgy in the Virgin Islands, where Epstein's island is located. So, Stephen Hawking, yeah. Epstein documents were released soon after that as well, with lackluster results and lukewarm reactions from the public. Not any bombshells, nothing interesting. In February 2024, Ron DeSantis signed a bill that would make the 2006 grand jury investigation public, and it revealed more of what we've already covered, that Epstein got a sweetheart deal. Also, prosecutors were painting victims as prostitutes, but that's also known from the fact that Epstein was charged back then with soliciting prostitution from someone under the age of 18, so that's just obvious. Most of this transparency and these releases were the result of civil litigation. It's not government transparency. But still, the Epstein case is to be used as a topic of political theater in response to public calls for something to be done about the alleged pedophile network Epstein and Maxwell seem to be at the center of course. And it wouldn't be until Trump got into office, after talking about releasing the Epstein files. The Epstein files, he said that so many times. He built part of his platform on that. All right, guys.
It's just very strange for a lot of people that the list of clients that went to the island has not been made public.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Probably will be, by the way. Probably.
So if you're able to, you'll be...
Yeah, I'd certainly take a look at it.
He made this big transparency song and dance. It kicked into high gear. The evolution of Trump's song and dance is pretty striking. June 2024, we get the promise as the American people from Donald Trump that he's going to declassify the Epstein files. Now, a year later, July 2025, they're made up by James Comey, Obama, Biden, and the Easter Bunny. That's a really fascinating way to say, well, I'm in them. So that's why I'm just lying to people. I'm just gonna lie. I'm just gonna say what's not true and then just bulldog my way forward and try to get Obama arrested. That seems like what's happening right now, which is insane. I had no idea the Epstein files were a liberal lie. I had no idea about any of that stuff, turns out. So yeah, going from being the most high-profile person in the world, championing the release of them, to being literally a part of a cover-up and saying, "No Democrats put my name in it." No, brother, I think you may have, to be honest, because you're a pedophile, probably. Seems like it, at least. I don't know. Even just a couple months ago, they championed the release of the Epstein files. The Trump administration invited conservative influencers to the White House in February of 2025, earlier this year, for what they labeled as phase 1 of the release of all Epstein-associated documents. It looked pretty good, like they were keeping their word. There was these cool photos and everything, but it was just more shit. It was just more shit we've already seen. The FBI director, Kash Patel, vowed during his Senate confirmation on January 30th to bring the full weight of the FBI against predators and protect children who have been exploited in the future, which clearly is not what he intends to do at all. That guy's a traitor. All right, let's send that guy out of here. How about that?
And I know that breaking up these trafficking rings is important to President Trump. So will you work with me on this issue so we know who worked with Jeffrey Epstein in building these sex trafficking rings?
Absolutely, Senator. Child sex trafficking has no place in the United States of America, and I will do everything, if confirmed as FBI director, to make sure the American public knows the full weight of what happened in the past and how we are going to countermand missing children and exploited children going forward.
Thank you for that.
Then just after this Kash Patel moment, and just before the phase 1 release, Pam Bondi, my favorite bitch, had told Fox News that the Epstein client list was on her desk.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Driving excitement for victims of child sex trafficking and abuse to see justice finally served to those who have been abusers at long last. But then, May 2025, Bondi reportedly briefed Trump that his name appeared in the documents. This preceded the administration's dramatic change from promising transparency to declaring that the client list no longer exists. Crazy. Then, just recently, Trump starts saying that the client list doesn't exist and it's a Obama, Hillary, Clinton, Biden hoax. Who knows? He said Bill Clinton went to the island 28 times. He said that. That's crazy. Pam Bondi even said the Epstein files were sitting on her desk. Then she backpedaled and explained that it was the file along with the JFK and MLK files, which they released that as well. Just to try to cover up, to try to get people, I don't know, dude. It seems really suspicious and really fishy. And you've seen everybody, typically loyal Republicans, have even broken the ranks. House Speaker Mike Johnson publicly contradicted Trump by saying, "I'm for transparency. We should put everything out there and let the people decide." Hey man, true. So yeah, we've got a convenient switch up right around the time that Trump has told his names appear in the Epstein files. And then he just starts lying about it, and I don't know, dude. We're cooked, brother. We're cooked, dude. We're cooked. We've been cooked, actually. Did you know that? There hasn't been a lot of time where we've been lukewarm for a long time. Oh, and also, Democrats have weaponized the issue while ignoring their own inaction. When pressed about why the Biden administration didn't release the files, Nancy Pelosi, my favorite human who has ever existed, and James Raskin couldn't provide explanations. The July 7th, 2025 DOJ FBI memo represents the government's attempt to close the book on Epstein, but its claims raise more questions than answers. The memo states there are over 1,000 victims, more than 10,000 pieces of CSAM, but also no more releases, no more investigations, and no third parties are involved by any degree. We're totally done. It's just Ghislaine, Brunel, Epstein. Case closed. The end. This conclusion defies logic given the scope of the operation especially. Standard RICO prosecutions routinely charge entire criminal enterprises from leadership to low-level participants. The Epstein operation involved pilots, schedulers, recruiters, and participants, yet only Maxwell and Epstein faced charges in America, and Jean-Luc Brunel died in a French prison. What about all the other people along the way who were a part of this trafficking operation? Apparently, Ghislaine Maxwell's serving in jail for this. The people who saw these girls getting on or off the planes and never said a word. How can 1,000 girls get preyed upon like that and it's all seemingly perfectly hidden from every pair of eyes except for those belonging to Epstein, Maxwell, and Brunel? Epstein killed himself, Brunel killed himself. The landscape of civil litigation is pretty revealing in how wealth translates directly into immunity from criminal consequences, allegedly. Attorney David Boyce claimed dozens of women remained bound by NDAs with financial penalties for for disclosure reaching the millions. And these agreements create what legal experts call cement shoes for justice. So victims receive compensation but cannot testify in criminal proceedings. Virginia Giuffre's 2009 settlement included language protecting anyone who could have been included as a potential defendant, effectively granting blanket immunity to the network. What? This is a starkly contrasting pattern to typical criminal cases. While organized crime prosecutions involved pretrial asset freezing and comprehensive RICO charges, and Epstein's wealth remained accessible for buying silence. It doesn't make any sense. There is a two-tiered nature to the American justice system, and it could not be any more clear thanks to Jeffrey Epstein. Unlimited resources purchase unlimited outcomes unavailable to ordinary people. Nobody believes anything anymore that people in the public are telling them. Public trust has collapsed accordingly. Thank God. Only 22% of Americans trust the federal government, while roughly 75% believe it is corrupt. Trust among 18 to 34-year-olds plummeted from 30% to 15% since 2022, dude. That is so embarrassing that it is insane. And we have to give them 30% of our money? Are you kidding me? To do what with it? Lie to us? It's unfair, dude. It's unfair. And there's just no justice. The whole Epstein story, case, whatever, you know, the 1,000 victims, young women. On top of that, it has completely destroyed the cohesion and trust between the public and the servants of the public. And it's just, I don't know, we're in a bad place. There's no justice. It's up. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I don't know why you watched this whole video. It's horrible. So, yeah.